I've already compiled you a few hidden gems on the PlayStation 3 that you should try and add to your collection, but the great thing about Spider-Man's favourite console is that there's always more underappreciated bangers to spotlight. With that in mind, here's our picks for games on the PlayStation 3 that have sadly been forgotten than more than just 2 Rockstar series. Drop your own forgotten gems down below and they could be featured in a follow-up video. Right, Mind Liebling, are you ready?
Brave now, are you?
So yeah, it is kind of strange to consider that a Wolfenstein game, a series that's one of the longest running and most recognisable in all of gaming, is sadly forgotten, but Raven Software's turn at the bat never made the same impact as other games in the series, selling pretty damn badly. Compare this to the much larger success of Machine Games' Wolfenstein games though, and it's almost night and day in terms of difference. Okay, so maybe not Youngblood. Sorry to invoke its name. Is that because Wolfenstein 2009 is a much worse game than The New Order? To be honest, not really. Reviews at the time weren't exactly glowing, but mediocre reviews haven't stopped games from being successful in the past, and there is kinda a B-movie schlocky charm to this little gem. Those who did pick up Wolfenstein, all 12 of us, found a game that embraced the more supernatural elements of the franchise with open arms, as series protagonist BJ butchers Nazis across a German village being mined for powerful crystals. If nothing else, players should try and seek Wolfenstein 2009 out to play if they were fans of The New Order, largely because it gives players just a bit more context to the relationship between BJ and Death's Head, the big bastard ballsack that he is. There's also the Tesla gun to use, which honestly just reminds us of Time Splitters in the best ways, and special Veil powers too, which are basically just Bioshock plasmids and let you do things like slow down time, and bullet time is always cool time. However, you're going to have to get this one physically, as due to the usual licensing bollocks, the game has been digitally delisted for reasons that have never been made obvious, to be honest. However, if you don't want to hunt down a physical copy, there is a very easy answer to this problem that is just a Google search away.
Okay.
You know what? There isn't enough whimsy in the world of gaming. 7 out of 10 needs more whimsy. Yes, there's a lot of charm if you look in the right places, but the mainstream market is often dominated by hard-hitting, well, misery, let's be honest. So what's wrong with games having a little wide-eyed wonder or childlike innocence? For us, Margin and the Forsaken Kingdom had enough sweetness and charm for an entire industry, but that same industry has, sadly, pretty much forgotten it. What 2010's hugely underrated action-adventure puzzler demonstrated was that the medium could still enthrall without constantly reverting back to violence in the age of the multiplayer FPS, though this isn't just a story of you getting a big rock to build you a cabin on the lake. The story of a young thief who finds a powerful mythical creature in order to rescue his homeland from the dread of a mysterious force known as the Darkness. Don't Let the Bells End feels like it wouldn't be out of place in a Pixar movie. Christmas time. As is often the case in the cruel modern world, sweetness and light often lose out to cynicism and loud explosions. That's why Klonoa has sold a combined 6 copies. Strong reviews couldn't save Margin from relative obscurity, which is a real shame considering it's evidently just quite a good game. It might have evaded mainstream attention, but the spirit of Game Republic's charming odyssey lives on in tales such as Ori and the Blind Forest and The Last Guardian. A worthwhile legacy after all then. We personally will always buy into the little guy and big stupid guy trope when it comes to video game partnerships, and would absolutely buy this if it came out again. It never even came to PC.
Who's on for a bit of free fall?
Fucking uncuff me!
No takers?
Stay on the
Gonna make me
ground.
Pick, huh? Oh, I bet you're feeling pretty unlucky right about now.
Listen, alright, we know what we like, okay, and we hope you'll like it too. Are we gonna sit here and pretend that Dead to Rights Retribution is some high art masterpiece of the PS3? No, of course not. The DTR games have always been like a guilty pleasure junk food that you can't help but gorge yourself on, you know? Like chocolate covered pretzels, despite the fact that you know that there's plenty of better options more readily available, and Retribution doesn't do anything to dissuade that notion at all. If anything, it puts more chocolate on top and more sprinkles. Despite that though, Dead to Rights Retribution is a simplistic and that's, put it lightly, simplistic yet competent shooter that serves as a great palate cleanser between some of the other PS3 games you can buy. It's a PS2-ass game, and we love that for it, frankly. Set in the fictional Grant City, Retribution reboots the Dead to Rights franchise and sees Jack Slate seemingly getting transformed into Chris Redfield. Joined by his trusty dog Shadow, who's basically just a wolf, who are we kidding here, Jack shoots a bloody path through the city in an attempt to find his father's killer, uncovering a plot of political intrigue and police corruption as he goes. Shenmue could never. Again, it's decent at best, but you can also play as a dog and kill people, so it's also Game of the Year every year. What's that? Call of Duty Ghosts? No, that is almost never the answer to anything, though Charlie was a good boy. If you enjoyed the Punisher game's crazy kill animations but wish there was like 90% more dog in it, Retribution is the perfect chocolate pretzel video game. Many of the most underrated PS3 games were simply just ahead of their time. A very loose interpretation of the 16th century Chinese novel Journey to the West, which was also adapted for the just released Black Myth Wukong that we think a few people liked. 2009's Enslaved follows protagonist Monkey as he escorts his companion Trip home after their ship crashes, navigating a hostile futuristic world in which wartime robots called mechs are still programmed to eradicate any surviving humans. Sounds a bit familiar, that. There are shades of Tomb Raider and Uncharted running throughout Enslaved, especially in the sequences in which Monkey is effortlessly traversing ruins of an ancient city or trepidatiously crossing a chasm using a rusty drain pipe. What's more notable is the influence Enslaved seems to have had on subsequent games. Hardly a surprise though, considering the fact that it originally started its conceptual life as a CGI movie. The Horizon games, not the ones with the cars, owe an apparent creative debt here, but the dynamic in Enslaved may actually be familiar to those who enjoy The Last of Us. Despite everything that it had going for it though, Enslaved ended up a commercial failure, maybe due to how expensive the motion capture was, including the fact that Mr. Motion Capture himself, Andy Serkis, portrayed Monkey. It was even written by Alex Garland, who's done a few good things and also not good things. But for one reason or another, Enslaved never really landed. It seems unlikely that players will enjoy another Odyssey with Monkey and Trip, but hell, if something like Alpha Protocol can come back, we'll never really give up hope. Now, you might be thinking that Asura's Wrath probably isn't that forgotten, and you might be kind of right there. Yeah. However, Asura's Wrath is probably best remembered as a terrible business practice rather than the bonkers slice of gonzo video game brilliance that it actually is. There have been many games over the years that have tried to go for that interactive anime aesthetic, but none have really stuck the landing quite like Capcom's Asura's Wrath. Sure, the game was rightly lambasted by everyone under the sun for that DLC nonsense, and the gameplay is about as shallow and simplistic as it gets, but Asura's Wrath is such a non-stop visual tour de force that it's hard to not have your jaw agape half the time. Taking elements of both Hindu and Buddhist mythologies while blending them with plenty of sci-fi too, Asura's Wrath follows the titular character, a guardian general charged with protecting Gaia, as he's betrayed and killed by his fellow generals. Living up to the adage of being literally too angry to die, Asura is resurrected 12,000 years later, swearing revenge on all that has wronged him. Cue plenty of ridiculous planet-sized fights and lots of stunning cutscenes, and you have the kind of big budget game that we are never, ever going to see again. That's crazy really, and a little sad to think about. Try to think of a game like this that came out in the last decade and you will probably struggle. Okay, I mean, The Quiet Man also released its proper ending as DLC and was like one big movie, but sadly the deaf guy didn't blow up any planets. There's always The Quiet Man 2, The Quietest Man, we guess. If you actually honestly remember this game, you deserve to be knighted. Between Folklore and Margin and the Forsaken Kingdom, we've already spotlighted a lot of developer Game Republic's work on our PS3 lists, but their final game, the hack-and-slash Knight's Contract, isn't quite as beloved as those two. Hell, Folklore wasn't even beloved at the time, to be honest, but it still earned way better reviews than Knight's Contract did, which was lambasted by critics when it launched in February of 2011, a year in which every reviewer was expecting every game to be made on a budget of $100 million. Set in a fantasy version of medieval Germany, which by the way was where chocolate pretzels were invented, you control the immortal knight Heinrich, who has been tasked with escorting the witch Gretchen in an attempt to stop the evil Dr. Faust. Interestingly though, Heinrich can't actually be killed, but Gretchen is absolutely weak to swords, arrows, maces and magic, and barely oxygen, so while you can just mash buttons to resurrect if you run out of health, you need to make sure Gretchen herself doesn't get killed. Sure, the gameplay might not be the most complicated ever made, and Gretchen's AI can often cause a bunch of problems as you're playing, but if you're looking for a decent, pretty good story that explores a relationship between two powerful warriors while also having some of that rough and ready charm of a AA game trying its best to act like AAA, Knight's Contract is worth checking out. Again, it never came to Steam, as it's from that era in which Japanese devs viewed PC as if the Lawnmower Man was watching their every move, so you're probably going to want to hunt this one down physically. Potentially one of the first anime that people watched because they heard Samuel L. Jackson played two of the leading roles, Afro Samurai is a bizarre curio of a series that's gained a cult-like following over the years. After being released as a manga in the late 90s, Afro really exploded in popularity. Afro Samurai really exploded in popularity with the anime series in 2007, which in turn led to Bandai Namco commissioning a hack-and-slash game as well. It's certainly not a patch on Metal Gear Rising Revengeance, because very little is, to be fair, but for a quick and dirty murderfest, Afro Samurai is great fun. In a version of feudal Japan that blends history with technology, society is governed by the number 1 and number 2 headbands. Whoever holds the number 1 headband will be a god, and can only be challenged to a duel by the number 2 holder. Unfortunately for whoever holds the number 2 headband, they can be challenged by anyone, with Afro Samurai having to take on all comers on the path to avenge his father's death at the hands of the outlaw, Justice. While mostly a simple retelling, the Afro Samurai game tweaks elements of the story, especially the ending, to create a more interesting tale with some admittedly mostly grey visuals with a nice comic book aesthetic, a frankly killer soundtrack, and a nice old dollop of blood. Afro Samurai never actually got a release on PC either, so it's console or bust for this one. The chances of a remaster of this are also pretty slim, for reasons that nobody has any idea about. It's not surprising to know that a digital-only PS3 game that only launched about a month before the PS4 launched would be lost in the shuffle, even if it was published by Sony themselves. I don't know why I put so much sauce in that even. Rain was an unfortunate victim of that timing, meaning it's become one of the most forgotten PS3 games of all time, despite the fact that its aesthetic and gimmick are some of the most interesting on the whole console. Set in a rainy city inspired by mid-20th century Paris, you control a young boy attempting to find a girl while the pair of you are being pursued by huge monsters. The twist with this game comes with the titular rain, as both the characters and monsters are only visible when they're being rained on, like they lied when they were 17. This lack of visibility when you're dry is used to solve puzzles and avoid combat encounters, as monsters can't see you either. The game's central mechanic might not be to everyone's taste, considering it relies on the player not being able to see their character for a good chunk of time, but Rain's novel approach to gameplay and heartbreaking story make it well worth seeking out, and also it's beautiful. Unfortunately, again, this one only came out digitally, but it did get a physical release in Japan, if that helps. It's usually a pretty good sign that your game was unfairly underrated or overlooked when the ideas shown start appearing in games a few years after your game's release. Sideway New York earns that distinction by being a platformer that displays a lot of similarities to both the pedestrian, which is an underrated banger by the way, and certain 2D sections in Super Mario Odyssey, where Mario enters a warp pipe and starts platforming on the side of a building, despite launching over 5 years earlier. Based on the art and graffiti culture seen in the improperly sized apple, Sideway New York follows Nox as they explore 2D levels set within a 3D space of New York City blocks. Along the way, you'll solve puzzles, collect a host of new abilities, and defeat a range of bosses. Yeah, it's your standard platforming fare, but again with a premise and aesthetic years ahead of its time. Imagine Mark Echo's Getting Up Content Under Pressure had a baby with something like Concrete Genie, another truly underrated gem on PS4 that deserved so much better, and you're part way there. Unfortunately, Sideway was delisted from PS3 storefronts when Sony Online Entertainment became a Daybreak Game Company, and the Steam version is considered to be the inferior version, so if you want to play Sideway on PS3, you might need to try another Sideway, if you catch our drift. As far as blatant rip-offs go, and we say this with love, Dante's Inferno is one of the best. Debt to God of War and Devil May Cry aside, Visceral Games' rest in peace own biblical-inspired effort ended up as an unrelentingly grim depiction of what will happen to all those misguided sinners who don't eat their vegetables or wear socks with sandals. Focusing on Crusader Dante's, yes he is also called Dante, but to be fair he did come first, quest to rescue his beloved Beatrice from the pits of the underworld, Dante's Inferno is a classic hack and slasher in which the central protagonist pummels his way through the circles of hell like the Punisher crossed with a very angry vicar. It's certainly a pretty unique experience despite all the, inspiration. How many games can say that they're based on the first chapter of Dante Alighieri's 14th century epic text, The Divine Comedy? How many games ask you to fight Lucifer himself, who is distractingly naked from the waist down in his goat-footed, giant-horned form? In fact, how many even dare to show the visceral horror of the 9 circles of the underworld, Shadows of the Damned, and Doom aside? If nothing else, Dante's Inferno deserves credit for being exceedingly ballsy, especially with regard to its superb boss designs and unrelenting commitment to its disturbing, unholy premise. The thing about Dante's Inferno is that it is just an inherently visceral experience. Pun maybe slightly intended. The undeniable truth, though, is that hell, while being exceedingly nasty, makes for a stunning backdrop, almost matching the Olympian vistas of the God of War franchise for sheer jaw-dropping scale, grim majesty, and atmosphere of unerring terror. If ever there was a game to get you into a confession booth, it's Dante's Inferno. Disturbing, intoxicating, and violent as all heck, this is about as much fun as you can have in the crushing horror of eternal damnation. Outside of the middle aisle of Aldi, of course. And that was our video looking at some of the PlayStation 3 forgotten bangers that you might not have played. I really wanted to put Blood Drive on here, but they wouldn't let me. I'm being silenced, I'm being suppressed, I am being bullied. I've been Jimmy for Cultured Vultures, and thank you for watching.